Well, hello, and welcome back to our radio show. I am Mark Seelinger. I am the director and founder of the Swamp School, and I want to welcome you to our show today. I hope you get something useful out of it. We've had a lot of good feedback so far on it, so we're excited. We had some callers last week, so that was also exciting too. And I will definitely invite you to call. Let me just put up your number here if you do happen to see it. But please give us a call at 919-297-2540. We'd love to hear from you. Now, before I get into there's a couple things I want to kind of go over. We have a sponsor, so we're kind of excited about that. So let me go back to these guys. And Kaze is a wonderful Japanese steakhouse. It is located in Garner, North Carolina, which is just a little bit south and east of Raleigh. And if you are looking for great Mother's Day plans, they tell me that they're completely booked for Mother's Day, but Friday and Saturday they do have seating available, and I'm told on the deck, which apparently is the high desire area. So if it's a nice day out, great place to take mom. So I do want to recommend that. The phone number down here and the address, or the phone numbers up top here, you can call and definitely check them out. But they're good friends, and they're very excited about our radio show. So with that, I will return back to me. And but basically, check them out if you are in the area. Okay. Now, the couple things I want to go over, we get into some more detail, is the Waters of the United States issue. We want to revisit that kind of on a weekly basis because it's probably worth revisiting on a weekly basis. And as of a few minutes ago, it's still in draft form. As a matter of fact, let me pull that up real quick, and I'll transition over to that so you can see it. But it is a... let me fade over here and do a quick look at this. So the waters of the United States, as of right now, the updated definition is waters of the United States, November 20th, and as of July 5th, the comments closed, and we still have two proposed rules. And actually, this was kind of fun. They did put this up. I want to click over here so you can see it. They did have a withdrawn rule. It got everybody excited. It was just simply a duplicate of the first rule. We mentioned this last week. It doesn't seem to be wanting to work. Maybe it is actually the rule. But basically, it was a duplicate rule. So we had an issue there. But as far as it's not actually, let me see. Unclick that. Maybe that's why. Usually it comes up. Oh, gee, the government website's down again. Oh, yep. So maybe they're putting the new one out. Anyway, well, we're not worried about that too much. But basically, the issue there, let me go back to me because we don't want to look at that. I'm wondering if you guys are listening. We've had a lot of fun with government websites in the last couple of weeks. We had a design class last week, and let me go back to here. And I'm multitasking here, which you're going to have to endure. But the issue is that they all seem to be going down. The sites have been very problematic. We're relying heavily on weather data for both the APT tool and the WetBud, which was used for a design class. And we were trying to do a analysis of a project in Oklahoma, which required we installing a weather station in WetBud. If you haven't used WetBud, it's a great tool for basically doing watershed analysis. And actually, as long as we're talking about WetBud, let me pull up the website for it because I wanted to talk about that today. Kind of getting ahead because it was related to weather. But you can download it. It is free. There's a little link here. You just have to give them, you can download it here. There's a version 3. And actually, I contacted the software developers about the problems we were having, and they were kind enough to completely rework it and fix some of the links. Basically, the story is that the sites have been going down on a regular basis, and I think what it is I heard somewhere online that they were doing away with the GSOD data as of last year. So that's the General Surface Observations of the Day, or at least the archive for it. So I'm not entirely sure what that's going to mean to us going forward in trying to use anything like, let's say APT, or doing any wetland design whatsoever, or running TR55s and HEC-RASs and all that other fun stuff. Anything that requires weather data is kind of a problem. So to that end, we do need to be aware of that. So it is something we're looking at as a problem. Now, in other news, we have the nationwide permit program, and let me flip over to that real quick. Over here. This is the WetBud page. I'm sorry. I think I'm a little bit behind on my timing on this. So this is the WetBud page. Let me just scroll down to the link here. So this is the latest wet version. It's still version 3, but it's 3 point something. And when you download it, you'll be able to get the latest and greatest Wetland. If you have a version of WetBud right now, you definitely want to do this, because if you do have to do any additional work that's not in the pre-installed weather bases, the weather stations, you're going to have to update that as well. Okay, so I've got that over there. And let me jump back to me. All right, that's me. All right, so let me find a couple things on the permits in the Army Corps. Want to get into discussion about this and some of the permitting issues that have come up. There's been a kind of a practical effect for more of these projects. One of the issues is that the 2026 nationwide permits came out about 6 weeks ago. They've been official, and one of the big issues about the nationwide is everybody asks, well, what if my nationwide expired, or I didn't do the work yet? Basically they'd expired on, I think it was March 14th, I believe is when they did it. So on March 14th they expired. I think that's on here. Yeah. So as long as your project, and they put this big red, or I guess kind of orange banner up here, that as long as your project was completed or under contract to be completed, and nothing's changed, that you can continue on, and I believe you have a year basically to do it. But you can also request a re-verification under the 2026 nationwide, so whether or not your project still qualifies. They made virtually no changes to them other than adding one, and I mean some very, very subtle changes. So there's probably not a whole lot to worry about on that front, but if you are a little uptight and you want to make sure that you're not getting in trouble with the Corps, which is perfectly understandable, you can go through it. It's supposed to be a relatively quick process. You go to this website, the regulatory request system. You basically have to sign up for it with a government ID program it's basically a ID verification system. It's a little more than just a username and password system. So you have to go through that and basically be eligible to be able to use the system. But once you do that, you were able to start the request and then basically submit on here. There are some other stuff on here as far as notices, violations, support, jurisdictional information, some basic information on here, but really the main one is this one, the RRS, to submit a request. And the other thing that you should know is that once you've submitted a request, you do have the ability to have your client, or if you're working with a team, there is a way to basically share your request, so you can actually submit this there. It's actually quite clever. The folks that were doing the RRS are trying to make it sort of the TurboTax of the Army Corps. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but they're trying to make it so that groups can basically submit on this and be able to see each other's information and kind of go through all of the permit application or submitting independent. So you actually have different levels of permissions and things like that. So it's pretty cool. So you just go in and you just, I can actually click this, but it's gonna want me to log in right away. So yeah, there's your sign in. There's my secret email address, which everybody knows anyway. But basically you have to go through that, login.gov. So basically you'll get into that. So that's working. So that's good. A couple other things I want to kind of jump into a little bit. Actually, let me zip back to me. A couple things that I wanted to go over was this show. Actually, it kind of occurred to me, I do this all the time, and actually I did this today. My plans were, I wrote it down. I have notes here. Let me show you my notes. I got notes. Let me pull them up here. I got pages of notes on this, the show notes and everything I'm going to cover, and I made them even really big so I can read them. But the issue here is that I thought it would be probably a good idea to talk about the Swamp School live show in the first place and what it's trying to accomplish. And again, we would really appreciate, I'm going to put my little phone number thingy up here, if you call. One of the things we're trying to do is make this something that people can call in, not only ask a question, but engage in the conversation. A number of years ago, there was a publication called Land and Water, which was a great publication. Loved getting it every month, and then it became a bi-monthly thing, and and then it phased out. We actually, for a very brief moment, were very close to being the owner of the Land and Water publication. We looked into it, and it just was more than we could take on. And the idea is that it acts as a forum for essentially the different disciplines that are related to wetlands. It was primarily, I think, originally started as like a sediment erosion control kind of journal. and it was all about doing, work in and around there. So they'd have devices, they'd have geofabrics, they'd have all kinds of different sponsorships. North American Green was one of their big sponsors, things like that. And there was always a featured project in there, and it would usually invariably become a wetland project. There was a lot of wetland related projects that, were kind of sort of became stormwater projects. I'm clipping here. I'm going to back off here a little bit. They were stormwater management projects and a lot of BMPs and things like that. And so it was a really cool publication. It was an opportunity to put your project out there without the normal scrutiny that you would go through if you're trying to get like published in Wetlands or SWS Journal or any of the kind of the technical peer review journal that would be something along the lines of, like essentially if you're going to write a paper, you're trying to get a degree, things like that. And that just seemed to be a bit overkill for what they were doing. So it was actually a great little publication. It was also a way that you say, hey, I read about your project in Land and Water. So we are trying to create a digital version of that. And the idea basically is that we have got much more than this is not a Zoom call. We've got, I'd like to, if I could move the camera without breaking everything, I'd like to show you our setup here. It's a little bit overwhelming, but we've got a lot of stuff on here, a lot of technology running. And we have the ability to actually not only take your calls, which we would appreciate if you called in, but also we have the ability for you to stream in. And we're looking for some companies to, maybe feature a project, brag about it, or advertise that you've got a job listing. We actually have that, and I'll go over that in a minute. We do actually have some folks that are basically looking for hiring people. So any of those sort of things would be in this forum. It's meant to be kind of an open dialogue and allow folks to talk about different topics they may be working on, problems they're running into. You can do it anonymously as an anonymous caller. We have actually, we'll put one more thing up here. If you just want to, before the show, send us an email, support@swampschool.org. You can send offline questions or comments, or, hey, I would like to sponsor, a class or a discussion on something. And we're not charging for any of this. This is all meant to be an open forum where basically we, professionals can talk and go over a lot of different topics and go over different issues. We are making a recording of it, and we're actually making a better recording of it because we're doing it locally. We learned Vimeo is great, but it makes a lousy recording. So we're recording this locally, and we're actually doing it in 4K and everything else. So it's a lot easier when you're doing it on your computer. But blowing up my computer right now. I've got a full-scale gaming. I'd love, anybody wants to ever come by the shop, I'd love to show it to you. I got compressors and equalizers and all kinds of cool stuff on here. So it's a lot of fun. We've been building this thing for years. But I mean, to give you an idea, I've got, I think, 13 tracks running right now to make this work. So it's a pretty complicated system, and we're kind of excited about it. But anyway, we would like to share it is really the bottom line. So if you want to reach out to us either by calling us, or sending us an email, and I'll just pull up the phone number again if you want to call us, just to say, you can call us and just let us know you're interested. But you're welcome to call in now or at any time. So with that, actually, let me jump over, as long as I mention this because I don't want to forget it. Let me put in the Radicki ad that we got. Let me flip over to this. We had I'll turn this off here, a company that had approached us about after the show. Let me turn this off. Go away. Okay. This is Radicki out in, I forget where they are, out in the West Coast. 206 area code, and let me just accept the cookies. And they have a couple open positions, a senior wetland scientist and a wetland natural resource scientist. If I open this, it gives me a little description. You can apply here. Describes they're looking for 15 years, so this is a senior one. I could do that twice, so that's cool. And let me go back to the other one, and we have a natural resource scientist as well at Radicki, and they are a bachelor's degree. PWS would be a nice, and 6+ years experience. So they're looking at people that have a little experience and are interested in working on the West Coast. So they contacted us after the show. And if you are, I like the owls. Those are great. So if you are interested in checking them out, there's their phone number up top. It's Radicki, RAEDEKE.com. And I think I'm spelling that right. Radicki. I think that's how they say it, Eki. You can check them out. So with that, I will go back to here. So But we welcome anybody who's listing jobs, anything like that. We'd like to put that up there. Again, the Swamp School's mission here is as a education institution, and this is sort of our career services department. So going on that, and also trying to help folks out with different technical issues that come up that kind of don't really fall inside a regular class. We like to think of ourselves as we don't just teach classes here. We basically prepare people for careers. And that's really truly our mission as the Swamp School. And this is one of these tools, and we're having a lot of fun with it too. I have to admit it. Now, let's talk about something less fun. Let me jump over to a problem that's come up. Let me get my, where are you? Oh, I turned it over here. More exciting tools. All right, and I need to open that up. Sorry about this. It takes me a moment to get some of this working. All right, I'm going to fade over here. Back in 2016, and I hope you can read that. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit here. Let me just try to zoom in a touch. See if it'll let me zoom in a little bit. Yeah, there we go. That's a little bigger. Okay. So back in 2016, this actually came out on Halloween. It was the regulatory guidance letter that serves a couple of purposes. The Army Corps of Engineers had essentially, let's see if I can find where they first mentioned it, two types of jurisdictional determinations. One was a approved jurisdictional determination. Here it is, approved jurisdictional determination. And this was done to, I guess, respond to the need to have a formal delineation, and basically it could be either part of a permit or as a standalone. And then you had this thing called the preliminary jurisdictional determination. And this actually had been around before this REGL came out, regulatory guidance letter came out. It just was not really written down as clearly as this was. And when you look at this is the one that they operate on today in terms of the AJD and the PJD. There's a couple issues that we need to address with both of these, and that's kind of one of the main topics of this week's program, kind of going into the permitting. So it's still under the auspices of nationwide permits. And the reason is that with these permits, let me see if I can scroll to the page. I'll scroll down here a little bit. There's also a no JD whatsoever. That's another one. And then since then, as long as we're kind of following the sequence here, in, I guess, the last couple of years or so, there's a thing called a delineation concurrence. So let me just go over what these are first before I get too into the weeds. An approved JD basically is a opinion of the Corps, and it would be considered to be a final agency action, so a legal opinion of whether or not the wetlands are, or whatever water body you're looking at, it's not limited to wetlands, is in fact a waters of the United States. They're basically going to stand by that until somebody tells them something different. A preliminary JD is more of a verification that usually it's a question of wetlands, not whether or not there's jurisdiction over it, but whether or not there's the presence or absence of water bodies on the property, and the water bodies are mapped to a certain extent. And what happens is that these PJDs are often used for nationwide permits. What it does is it alleviates the need to have to go back and forth between, do I agree with this? Is this jurisdictional or not? Or is it or isn't? Basically, they fight over where is it located. And then basically the applicant would be the person applying for the permit, would be the agree, essentially, that whatever these things might be, the Army Corps of Engineers, it's sort of a de facto jurisdiction. I don't know if that's a great way to look at it, but basically the idea is that they said, we're not taking jurisdiction over it, but if they were jurisdictional, we would require this permit to fill it in. That's essentially how this works. And this worked okay for a while when there was really no debate over what a wetland, whether a wetland was jurisdictional or not. It either was or wasn't. And even under the Rapanos rules and the pre-Sackett II rule, this was relatively clear cut. And so many nationwide permits were issued under this. They're still issued under this concept. Now, there's a problem, and I call it the perils of the PJD. The problem is that not all wetlands are jurisdictional, and not all waters are jurisdictional. By applying for a PJD nationwide permit, and you are basically, you're saying, okay, I've got an acre. Let me go to my whiteboard here. I'll do this. I kind of wanted to do the whiteboard thing anyway. I just have to find the whiteboard. Here it is. Let me flip over here. So let me do an example. So let's say, shrink this for a second. So let me get my pen, my cool little pen here. So let's say I have a wetland over here. I'll make it a red wetland. Okay, there's my wetland. All right. And I've got I don't know if I can use a different color here. I'm going to use my multicolor stream. So here's this is looking awful like a farm pond, right? So down here, and then we have, I'll just use a highlighter just to make it bigger. There's my WOTUS. That's my big stream that's going to. Now, in cross-section, here's my pond, here's my stream, here's my WOTUS. So this is my waters here. Okay, so the stream is going downhill. Now we're exaggerating here, but the pond. So the issue here is under the current rules, this would not be jurisdictional. So just big X here. So nope, not jurisdictional. The reason being is that in order for it to be jurisdictional, the water has to be indistinguishable from the existing WOTUS to here. There basically has to be a permanent connection, and it has to be indistinguishable between this and this. The idea being is here's your wetland here in cross-section, and your WOTUS is here. And so the water bank is basically going this way. And the direction really has to be from here. So the water is coming from the essentially this navigable waterway, not this way. Okay, this way doesn't count. Okay, that way doesn't count. And that's a big change. Well, the issue is, I got a lot of mess here. The issue is that this WOTUS, or this was a WOTUS, this might have been a WOTUS in the, basically the pre-Sackett era. So we'll just call it the pre-Sackett era, the pre-2023 era. This would have been probably jurisdictional at the time. And because what it would be is this would be a significant nexus to a downstream water. And that was kind of a classic Rapanos decision kind of thing. So what's happened is they basically said, okay, well, we're taking this away, especially if this was, let's just pretend it's an ephemeral stream. It's just a drainage way that only overflows when the pond gets full. So this is a farm pond. So what happens? The Corps basically says, okay, it's not jurisdictional anymore. Well, if you don't want to, let's say you have a town that says, well, we need a JD on this. You would only want to apply for an AJD. You don't want to apply for a permit because you're not doing anything that's permittable. Well, this is what happened with this Regal. This is why this Regal happened in the first place. There was a case called the Hawks case that preceded this Regal. And the issue was up until Hawks, the Army Corps of Engineers only did what we'll call basically approved JDs as a kind of customer convenience. It was a service to the public, I think was the term that they had used, but they're under no legal obligation to issue an approved JD that has no relationship to a permit. Well, the problem is under Hawks, the applicant was a peat mine company, and they were arguing that there was no doubt that the waters of the water area was a wetland, like our farm pond would be a water body. It is a wetland. Let's pretend it's a swamp if you want. It's a wetland, but it's not connected to any downstream waters. And back then, they were still using the significant nexus test. And the argument was, well, the only way the Corps would give you an official answer was if you applied for a permit. Well, the problem is if you apply for a permit under an AJD, then you're going to have to do a whole bunch of paperwork that involves tens of thousands of dollars or more of engineering and design and so forth. And all they want to do is excavate out peat. They're actually using the peat as underlayment for putting greens. And that was the purpose of the Hawks case site. And Justice Roberts had made a comment about that. It's something about needing better, having something to do with a golf game. But the issue basically was that they came up with this as a result of doing the jurisdictional determination, and what the Hawks were basically claiming is that by calling it a jurisdictional wetland or not a jurisdictional wetland, that's a final agency action, and the Corps had never saw the AJD as a final agency action. As a result of Hawks, it became a final agency action. So why is that important today? So back to the PJD. Let's say you applied for a permit today and you don't want to deal with the AJD problem, so you're just going to, you want to fill this in. Well, the Corps is not going to tell you this is not jurisdictional. Okay, let me go back to my thing here. Let me let me just clear this actually. Hold on a second. I'm just going to clear the board. Okay, back to this. So what we have is we have our wetland again. I'll use a black wetland this time. All right, so here's our wetland, and there's no questions asked. I'll put a little symbol here. Okay, it's a little rough there, but there's your wetland. So you've got no questions asked wetland. Well, the issue is if you ask for a PJD to run a road across it, right? We're going to run a road across it. The Corps will give you one. They will absolutely give you a PJD, and they will say, yes, if you filled in, let's say this is 0.2 acres, okay, 0.2 acres. I think at that point, I think you're allowed, let's say it's a nationwide 14, I think you're allowed up to 0.5 acres. Well, you might have a mitigation requirement that comes out of that based upon whatever the state water quality certificate is. This is where the states gets involved, that if you fill X number of acres of wetlands, that you have to mitigate for it. Well, the problem is this is not a jurisdictional wetland, yet the Corps will still issue a PJD because you never ask them formally to make a determination as to whether or not it is a jurisdictional wetland. All you've asked them is this fall? The idea would be, should this ever become a jurisdictional wetland, would you require a permit? And the Corps would say, yes, you would do, and you would need to do these 10 things. So that's the idea behind it, is that the PJD allows the applicant to avoid having to fight about getting an AJ, basically an approved jurisdictional determination, which supposedly is more expensive and more time consuming. And it also gives the Corps a break, because then basically they can't be held accountable for it. And they're basically calling things that aren't really wetlands, wetlands are different, not really waters of the United States. They're calling those waters. They're basically saying, well, that's a wetland, and if it turns out to be a waters of the United States, then it would be jurisdictional. But we don't worry about it because it's a PJD. So today, the problem with the PJD is there are a lot more of these water bodies that are not jurisdictional, and what we're seeing continuously, I mean, recently, as in weeks ago, where basically, I'm going to flip back to me. What we're seeing is that there are PJDs going out the door left and right because it's a way to expedite the permit. But what's happening is that essentially the applicant is not actually being asked to mitigate, permit, or do something otherwise that it may not be under any obligation actually legally to do. But rather than have to suffer the process, they will basically concede that, yeah, well, it might be a wetland, so we'll just stay away from it, which is a good thing. Just stay away from it. But there are circumstances where that may not necessarily work out. So that's essentially the update on that. And I've never been a fan of the PJD. I'm a little more concrete operational. I like to know, is it jurisdictional or is it not? And don't give me this PJD nonsense. Just give me, is it jurisdictional? Whatever, and get off the pot. Tell me if it's jurisdictional, because I don't really want to know, but this PJD thing was always a problem. The delineation concurrence letter is even kind of weirder, because basically that's sort of there's not a permit involved. It just sort of is, do you agree with where these wetlands are? And they'll say yes or no, and that's it. They don't tell you whether they're jurisdictional, but they do agree with the footprint. This is handy in the realm of permitting with the town. So let's say you're gonna get a building permit or a earth moving permit or something like that, and the town would require that you get some kind of verification from the Corps that your wetlands are accurate as shown. And they'll say yes, but if the moment they ask you, are they waters of the United States, the answer from the Corps is they didn't answer. So they didn't say yes or no. So that's the issue. Now back to, let me find my website here. Let me flip over to this and back to this. What happens here, shrink that, I got to find it. So, is that when you do your starter request, you're basically asking the Corps formally, what's the process and how to go through it. So this is the way you go about it. Now, they're trying to make it as easy as possible to get this information in, hence the digital version. And you can start a request, and basically they turn these things around in about 30 to 40 days. Typically, it's pretty quick, because they have to if there's a permit attached. If there's not a permit attached, there is no timeline for an AJD. So that's the other downside to using an AJD. But again, in my mind, it never really, not answering the question is helpful. as you would, you'd hope it would be. So anyway, that's a long version on a short story, but basically that's kind of the issue. And this rolls kind of into, I'll switch back over to me. It rolls back into some of the banking issues that come up, the compensatory banking. Basically, that becomes more of a business side and decision, because what will happen is you have to mitigate for something that may or may not actually be jurisdictional. And that's something that can be extremely expensive, in sometimes the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so you're looking at, a lot of people understands the delineation, but they don't really understand how the banking works. And we get into, basically buying something and just assuming, well, the bank owns it. Now, the question is, what happens if you buy a mitigation credit you don't need? And it turns out it's not jurisdictional anymore. That's going to be the next set of lawsuits, because, the idea is that the concept behind mitigation banking is that you have a ledger, and the ledger says, well, I've got on the left-hand side, I basically have my debits, and on my right-hand side, I have my credits. So my debits are my wetland loss. So let's say I fill in an acre, so I lose an acre of wetlands on the debit side, and then on the bank side, the credit is going to be 2, because I'm going to do 2 to 1, so I'm going to put back 2 acres. Well, now what if I didn't actually lose the 1 acre? So the 1 acre is still, it was never there to begin with. So what happens, and do you have a recourse to get that money back? And that's something I'm not entirely sure we have an answer to that. So that would be unfortunate. But anyway, if anybody's out there listening and would like to call in, we'd love to hear from you on this, because this is a kind of sticky mess on this. So anybody's got some experience with that would appreciate it. A couple other things just to kind of go over. We were also talking about the weather. And let me switch back over to here and back onto my screen here and fade over. We have this is kind of the NOAA's National Hurricane Center. We're basically getting ready. June 1st is the beginning of hurricane season, and kind of looking what the year looks like. Of course, we've just been through a whole bunch of droughts, and I think we're still in a drought technically. But basically, if you were looking at restoration sites, sediment controls, crossings, vulnerable infrastructure, you basically want to be prepared for any kind of storms and storm prep, anything along those lines. That's going to be a big issue. Or doing assessments. Actually, we've got a macroinvertebrate class coming up next week, and which we'd love to have you come in to take. Let me pull up that page while I'm at it, thinking about it. We have this one, the Clean Water Act Master and Macroinvertebrate Studies, and we get into field work, and it should be a great class. Got a lot of fun stuff in there. But it's next week, and this is one of those things you definitely want to, back to the hurricane problem, is you want to get those studies done before they all wash down the stream because of big storms. So those are some things to basically get ready for. But it is more than just damage response. It affects field conditions and documentation and any project risks. So you do need to identify those. If you have any vulnerable sites, we definitely want to keep an eye on that. I think the last thing we were going to talk about, let me just pull up my notes here. That might have been close to the end. One last thing on this. We have the PFASs and biosolids here. Let me go fade back to me, and then I will find that. There is a new EPA document that literally came out about a week ago, and let me flip over to that. This is about the interim guidance on destruction and disposal of the PFASs and biosolids. The issue is how these things are dealt with. One of the problems is that these tend to end up in wetlands, and so these things are basically is one of those issues where science, regulation, and liability questions are all moving at the same time, and that we're getting into some real challenges on this. Even if you don't work, this is all primarily related to wastewater, but it also gets into land use and disposal decisions and site risk, especially if you got some kind of spray irrigation system on your site and there's a possibility that this stuff ended up in there. There's actually a new phase 1 for land that just came out maybe a year or so ago. We're still working on putting this class together. If you guys do phase 1s, this is completely, I don't want to say it's different, but it's intense. We thought we'd just it's just, phase 1 for land. How hard could that be? No, it's pretty intense. It's a completely different discipline, and it's basically dealing with raw land. And these are things like that you would be looking at what we call RECs, which record, basically a concern, recognized environmental concern. So this is out for public review. I'll just kind of quickly scroll through the table of contents. But basically, you can see it's an interim guidance. It deals with solid and liquid waste as well as gas phases, basically where these things end up, how we get rid of them. And the PFASs are those forever chemicals. That's if you need the buzzwords here. They're the forever chemicals associated with landfills. We have wells, injections. And then again, just spraying out on the landscape is often an issue. And you'll see this sometimes with some of these forever chemicals come in some kind of weird places. You'll see this in agriculture where it might be part of the manure management program, and they've got these chemicals that were used for some reason. They end up in there, so that is a definitely concern. So I will just put up the call number one more time here if you guys would like to call in, and I'll fade back over to me. So that is the bulk of what we wanted to cover this week, because I know it's a lot. It's pretty quick, kind of rapid fire here, but there's a lot of stuff going on. And I want to see if we have anything else I'm missing on my notes. I think I got it all. But we've got a busy season coming up. We've been very busy with working on classes. We're actually working on, I think, 3 or 4 right now at the same time. We're looking at HGM. We're actually doing 2 different versions of HGM, one for kind of consultants, kind of high level, or actually in the weeds view, and then we have more of a high level view one. We felt that maybe the general public would want to know kind of what that process is. We've got one on actually doing NWI evaluations in the field. That process is ancient. It hasn't really been spelled out in very great detail, so we're actually working on putting together the protocols that are needed for that, and also doing a number of other kind of cool projects. When we get there, and then the phase one that I told you, phase one for land. Which is another one. So we've got, actually, I think technically we've got two plus the one plus that one is a lot. We did get a bit of news about West Virginia. If you're interested in working in West Virginia, we have we are actually one of the few providers, if not the only provider, for the WIVRAM program. We were asked, I want to say it was 3 or 4 years ago, and we'll just flip back over to this. We had a show that we were doing, or class we were doing for up there, and they approached us and asked us if we would be willing to put anything online, or if we could host basically their West Virginia rapid assessment method. And essentially the idea is that it's required that all wetland projects have this. Well, for a while the state was doing the training, and I think the problem was that was getting a little bit overwhelming to them. So they approached us and said, would you put together? And then, of course, the person working was retired. Well, they just announced about a week or so ago that they are no longer doing any of the training at all at the state, but we are, the Swamp School is actually is a solution to that. So if you have folks that need to get trained on WIVRAM, we've got a great online program for you for that. So that's a pretty good one. So with that, I think I meant to put this one up last, but I'll put this up. Don't forget, our next show is next Friday, and we're going to introduce this new streaming technology. If you have an interest in joining us live, you can do it from wherever you are. It's kind of like a Zoom call, but it's a little more sophisticated. But all you need is a headset and a microphone. That's it, and a camera, and we can have you stream into our stream and basically put you in there. If you would like to do anything you want to talk about, just drop us a line. You can call. Basically, you can, probably the quickest way would just be send a ticket to back over here to support at swampschool.org and just say, hey, I'm interested. Be anywhere in the world. So if you're on the West Coast or India, wherever, Sri Lanka, anywhere, we can do that. We've actually had a lot of students from New Zealand. That's been a very popular place for us. So we've got a lot of folks from New Zealand. So if you're in New Zealand and you want to talk to about the hydrology stuff that's going on over there, that would be great too. So definitely drop us a line, send us an email, and we'll set you up. It's very easy, doesn't cost anything, and all you have to do is send it on over. So with that, I will wish you good day, and I appreciate your time. I'm Mark from the Swamp School, and I hope you had a great day, and we'll see you next week. So with that, I'm going to flip over here and fade out.